Hello, everyone. I'm Humble,
And I'm Xenulous.
coming to you from Labyrinth TCG, and we are here to go over the decks to play if you're looking to take down your set championships and take home that coveted Ursula promo and playmat.
Today, we're going over the top decks along with some Tier 2 considerations, covering the strengths, weaknesses, matchups, and tech options.
First up is Ruby Sapphire Control. On screen, you see the stock Ruby Sapphire deck, popularized by Siler, called Sisu on Ice. The strengths of this deck are an unmatched late game, individual card power levels, card draw being unmatched by any other deck of the format, and reset buttons in the terms of Be Prepared and Big Sisu. Its weaknesses are its high inkable counts, anemic early to mid game, and higher levels of mulligan decision difficulty. As far as matchups go, it's good in the majority of the field. It only falters into the faster aggro decks. For tech options, we have cards like Dragonfire, McDuck Manor, Judy Hops, Great Stone Dragon, and Lady Tremaine.
Next, let's look at Emerald Steel discard. Here, you'll see a stock list that was popularized by the Rat, who won the last Disney Lorcana Challenge. The strengths of this deck are that it has a very oppressive and powerful strategy. It's arguably one of the easiest decks to pilot of the top 4, given that the strategy is very streamlined. It has a high snowball potential, and it punishes opponents' slower starts. Weaknesses being very little comeback potential if you end up getting board wiped and you're not able to empty your opponent's hand in the early game. Overall game plan hinges on you having Bucky on 2, and weaker overall power scaling if you hit a top deck mode in the late game. As far as matchups go, it has the power to defeat every deck in the format with the right mulligan strategy in the right opening hand, but it is extremely weak to board wipes and consistent removal. Tech options for the deck end up being Flynn Rider, the Floodborne version, Hidden Cove, the Pegasus shift line, Grab Your Swords, Sudden Chill, and Morph.
Next up is Ruby Amethyst Midrange. On screen, you have the deck that recently won the 10K by Lucas Serrano. Its strengths are a 50-50 matchup spread into the entirety of the field. It's not good against anything, and it's definitely not bad against anything. Its board wipe potential, as it also can play Be Prepared. The ability to combat the meta from multiple angles with cards like Queen's Castle. Unconditional card draw, meaning you don't have to meet any conditions to draw the cards like you do in Ruby Sapphire. And consistency, as it's one of the most consistent decks of the 8 decks featured here today. Weaknesses. Cards you cannot interact with are items. When your opponent puts down an item in play, it stays there for the entirety of the game. It's also weak to discard strategies. Looking at you, Bucky. Its matchup spread, it's like I said before, it's good into most decks of the format, with its only glaring weakness being into Emerald Steel, and even that's still winnable. Not a lot of tech options on this one, as the only tech options that are viable in this strategy are Maui's Fishhook, Pascal, and Maleficent 3-drop.
And last of the big 4 is the Sapphire Steel Dime deck. Here, you'll see a stock list that was popularized by Brennan DeCandio to make top 8 at the last Disney Lorcana Chicago Challenge. The strengths of this deck are that it's by far the most consistent item deck, running 4 Fortispheres and 4 Popsicles for unmatched early game card draw. Wheel by itself is a powerhouse of a card that can ruin your opponent's mulligans, but also refill your hand after you've aggressively inked to a high count. And it has a higher density of powerful Lucky Dime targets, being in Bell and Ariel. The weaknesses of this deck are that all of your removal is damage based, instead of something like Ruby that has access to Madame Medusa and Lady Tremaine. It itself is susceptible to Ruby removal. Be Prepared kind of takes care of everything in your deck, and Brawl ends up taking care of your lower cost guys like Hiram. It can also lose to itself. Sometimes you try to mulligan to find inkables, only to find 3 wheels in your opening hand, and you're not allowed to play the game. Matchups. It is the best deck into opposing steel matchups because of Cogsworth by himself. But it is the weakest deck of the top 4 into Ruby matchups. Your tech options for this deck are Bell and Ariel, Hades, Avalanche, Rise of the Titans, Maurice's Workshop, the 2-drop Magic Broom, and Scuttle. First of the Tier 2 considerations is Amber Emerald Discard. Here, you'll see a stock list that was popularized by Joseph Quigley, also known as Pandemonium Heart, who did really well at the Disney Lorcana Challenge in Chicago. The strengths of this deck are that it has a higher quality of powerful discard cards in You Have Forgotten Me and Lucifer, something that Emerald Steel does not have access to. It has a surprise factor, in that you can hide that you're running Amber along with the Emerald coloring, and maybe some people will mulligan for the Emerald Steel discard. It's also really good into the best deck in format that many believe to be Ruby Sapphire. The weaknesses of this deck are that it's weak to interaction, as you need multiple turns to set up to get your engine rolling. It requires multiple moving pieces in setup, like Prince John, Flynn Rider to live, Sudden Chill, and Bare Necessities in the early game. And its overall weakest individual card power levels. Once you hit top deck mode, not a lot of cards come back to get you back on the field. As far as matchups go, it has the most volatile matchup spread among the top decks, but being strong into Ruby Sapphire, it's always a good contention for any set championship you go to. Tech options for this deck would include Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, Under the Sea, Lucifer, Cricky, Just in Time, and Hidden Cove.
Next up on the list is a personal favorite of mine and something that's pretty close to my heart, Amber Ruby Mufasa. On screen, you'll see one of my lists that I've been testing with pretty good success. The strengths of this deck is its high card quality. Every card individually is strong on its own. It has explosive draw power with the Gothel and Rapunzel combo. Its overall game plan is pretty resilient into most of the field. Just one Be Prepared typically isn't enough, but Be Prepared's 2 and 3 are the ones that get you. It is the most techable deck, with as many flex slots as up to 20. Its weaknesses, it's very weak to tempo disruption. If Ursula ever gets to copy a song and you get 2 of your things removed, you're gonna have a bad time. It is the most fair deck of the meta, as typically you're only casting 1 character per turn. And it can be weakened to multiple board wipes. Like I said before, the first and second Be Prepared aren't always the thing that gets you, but it's the third. This deck's matchup spread is strong into everything that's not Emerald. As far as tech options go, we have Hydra, Chernobog, the 6-cost evasive Peter Pan, Teeth and Ambitions, Abomination Stitch from set 1, Brawl, Be Prepared, the Shift Mulan, Julieta, Doc, 3-cast Beast, RLS Legacy, and Hades.
Next of the Tier 2 options is Amber Steel Songs. Here, you'll see a stock list brewed up by our very own Lorcana Bro. The strengths of this deck are that it's very consistent. It has the highest power scaling and explosiveness of the meta, being able to wheel as early as turn 2, and generally has a fairly linear game plan. The weaknesses, ironically, are that it also has a fairly linear game plan. It can lose to itself quite easily in the same way that Sapphire Steel can, where your mulligans can just be unplayable, and you have sequency requirements, needing to see your shift lines and songs in the proper order to play the deck. The matchups, it is a strong matchup into the majority of the meta, and really only hard loses to Ruby Sapphire, but with the right tech, being flutes, you have a lot of legs in that matchup. Speaking of tech, your options can include Pride Lands, Flutes or Lanterns, Phil, World's Greatest Criminal Mind, Amber Ursula on turn 2, or Cinderella on 7.
Last but certainly not least, we have Emerald Amethyst Aggro. On screen, you'll see the deck that was piloted to a top 2 finish by Jordan Moore. The strength of this deck is its explosive early game, having a great aggro game plan with Cursed Merfolk into Flynn Rider. It also has incredible tempo disruption with Mother Knows Best, as well as Kit Cloudkicker, being able to clear your opponent's boards for a turn or problematic threats, that way they can't challenge your early game. It also has extremely good card draw. Much with the Ruby Amethyst deck higher up in this list, it has the purple card draw engine, which is proven to be extremely good for multiple sets in a row. Its weaknesses are steel removal, as all the spot removal in steel are able to interact with your board state, as none of them are very strong. Early game interaction is something that you really don't want to see as you pilot this deck, as you're really trying to get to high lore counts early to try to close the game out with castles. Also, tempo disruption seems to be a glaring weakness as well, as if your opponent's doing a similar game plan, those mirror matches can take forever. As far as its matchup spread goes, it's good to control decks, or any other deck that requires a lot of setup, as your curve is very oppressive into things that can't deal with you. Your only real weak matchup is anything playing steel. As far as tech options go, we might have Cusco from set 1 make a reappearance, the 7-drop Ursula from set 4, Jacques or Lyle, Kit Cloud Kicker, the Boss is on a roll, the evasive set 1 Tinkerbell, and Cricky. And those are the 8 decks of the meta that you should consider going into your set championships. I, for one, will probably be leaning towards my Pride and Joy Moof Moof, but also Ruby Sapphire Control is also a very good consideration. Xenulous, what are you thinking about?
I'm also leaning into Ruby Sapphire Control, but I've also had a lot of time on Steel Sapphire Dime, so I might be considering that as well.
Tell us down in the comments what deck you're going to take to set championships, and I hope you guys get your Ursula.